Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our webinar on CEO Performance Planning and Appraisal in a Challenging Economy and Scrutinized Healthcare Environment. My name is Vicki Radcliffe, and I will be your moderator today. Before we get started with our presentation, I'm going to just very quickly review a few basic instructions for our audience. I want you all to please be aware that your lines are muted, and they will be muted for the entire presentation just to reduce noise and distractions that we might hear on the line. So just be aware that if you speak randomly into line, we cannot hear you. At the end of the presentation, we will allow time for question and answers. At that time, I will unmute all the lines so your line will be able to be heard. If you have a question that you would like addressed, you can go ahead and ask it at that time. Two ways that you can go ahead and submit your questions. First, you can navigate to the Q&A button at the top of your screen on the menu bar. Simply type in your question and hit submit, and then we will read out your question and answer it for you. Alternatively, on the top right, you'll see a button labeled feedback that has a green square. You simply drop that menu button down, change it to the purple square, which denotes you have a question. At that time, I'll be able to call on you, and you can personally ask your question into the line, and our presenters will answer it for you. With that, I'm happy to introduce our faculty for today's webinar. We have Jim Rice. He's the Executive Vice President of our Governance and Leadership Services, and Kate Brecky, consultant also with our Governance and Leadership Services group.
Thank you. Today we're going to have a conversation with Kate Brecky, who's been leading our process over the past year to explore new developments in CEO performance planning and appraisal and the relationship of that with pay, especially during these difficult and challenging times. One of the things that we will explore together today in this webinar is that during challenging times, there is a premium on CEO performance. Performance in all dimensions: quality, market position, financial strength of the organization, developing clinical relationships, and the like. As we discuss the flow of our conversation, we'd like you to keep in mind that we've found that good boards do a good review of the chief executive, but our hope is that from these brief moments with you today that you will help your board and your chief executive move to a superior position where they are not only involved in planning for and conducting a wise CEO performance appraisal process, but that you will make sure that there is built-in additional attention on performance planning. So superior boards do a great job of performance planning. It's a part of the renewed approach we're seeing in the industry to talent management. In many respects, this short webinar is going to be looking at not just having the board and the chief executive be key champions for talent management inside the organization. We'd like to see more talent management in the interface between the board and the chief executive. Where pay has been used as a method to attract and retain and incent the CEO's performance in the past, this webinar is going to be trying to suggest that at the intersection of the challenge of attracting CEO talent, attracting and developing CEO talent, and retaining and nurturing and developing that talent is very much a part of a fresh approach to CEO performance planning, CEO performance appraisal, and as Kate will be sharing with us, the occasional links as it relates to pay. As you'll see on slide 4, the flow of our discussion with you today is to remind all of us that the fishbowl we find CEOs wrestling with a number of challenges in right now provide a premium on a focus for CEO performance planning and development. We will look at some of the challenges that are evolving in pressure on pay for CEOs from external review, as well as the challenging economy. We will move through some remarks about how the board can work in partnership with the chief executive to take a more disciplined and deliberative approach to overseeing a wide variety of CEO performance. and governing executive compensation. We'll look at some key lessons we've learned in this exploration of CEO performance planning and appraisal, some critical success factors for doing a better job of the planning side of CEO performance, and then a fair amount of insights we will share with you on how great organizations are conducting superior appraisal processes. So, as we start moving into the webinar, the pressures on CEO performance are large. There is a reduced tolerance for weak performance. The challenge for strategic highlights in quality, in safety, in market growth, in service volume growth, in financial performance are going up. Huge need for enhanced position alignment. Much of that rests on the shoulder of the chief executive. And also the chief executive has huge pressure now in a recessionary climate, and a climate that is putting huge pressure for rapid change. The chief executive must be also the chief officer for quality, fiscal vitality, growth, pride, and community benefit. So we're going to move now into a conversation with Kate Brecky, looking at some of the challenges that are facing CEOs and boards as they look at everyone having an opinion about chief executive pay. In these recessionary times, the rate of increase has slowed. There's now less pressure on expanding pay and more pressure on expanding performance. Kate, thank you for joining us in this conversation. Maybe you can remind us of the context of sharp oversight and scrutiny on pay to executives, and then we'll move from that through a discussion of some of the advances you found in your work on moving CEO performance into the center stage for board work.
Thanks, Jim. We know all too well that regulators have been increasing their focus on executive pay in a multitude of ways. We've seen new regulations and proposed limits on pay. For example, Massachusetts Attorney General is reviewing tax-exempt compensation pay practices currently. Rhode Island has already proposed compensation limits. There's also more challenges by state regulators pertaining to linking executive pay to community benefits, questions around how that's being done by organizations, as well as misuse of charitable assets. On slide 10, we capture the changes having been completed to the IRS Form 990 with the new goals of promoting accountability, promoting compliance, and enhancing transparency. Probably the biggest change for us with Form 990, as most of you have in some way experienced or touched, is the dozens of questions that are being asked on the form about executive pay, governance practices, and community benefits. And the theme of community benefit is something that we're going to come back to over and over again as we continue through this presentation. It's a focal point for the IRS and for Congress these days, as much as governance practice and executive pay has been a focal point for them. On slide 11, I also capture the additional studies and audits that are being done by Congress. IRS is conducting abbreviated audits of executive compensation currently and over the last years. 1,200 healthcare organizations, in fact. IRS is conducting surveys, assessing compliance with Section 4958. 500 hospitals have been part of that. The Governance Accountability Office is conducting a survey on structure and basis for determining pay. And then also the IRS is conducting a study on charity care and community benefit. Again, that theme of community benefit is tax exempt hospitals, and this is an in-depth probe by the IRS with 10 specific hospitals. And then, of course, there's healthcare reform that's affecting governance and executive pay. Already on slide 12, we've seen the Taxpayer Bill of Rights to put in place and rolled out through Section 4958, which authorizes fines essentially when an organization engages in private embezzlement by paying too much or selling assets for too little or facing pay on revenue. The financial penalties under Section 4958 are known as intermediate sanctions and can apply to both insiders of the organization as well as the trustees.
Kate, you're making me very nervous, and I know boards have become nervous about the pay side of CEO performance arrangements. If that weren't challenging enough, all of these people with opinions and concerns and oversight, I know you've also found that the economy itself is putting an increased pressure on enhancing the approach for CEO performance planning. Why don't you hit some of the highlights now of the healthcare squeeze that we see as well?
Sure. On slide 15, some of the things that you're all dealing with that we will run through include Medicaid cuts, decline in Medicare reimbursement, decline in philanthropy, tightened credit, etc. And so as a response, you're limiting capital spending, you're reducing cost structure, experiencing demand from physicians for financial support. So it's a tough situation. Of course, there's always bright spots, and we wanted to put one of those in, which is the ever-increasing demand for healthcare, which in turn then increases employment numbers in the healthcare industry. And in January, saw an uptick of 15,000. But in general, things are tough.
Okay, we know that on this webinar we have a few board members, a couple of CEOs, and some human resource folks. All of those three perspectives are concerned with the role of the board in approaching CEO performance planning and appraisal. What have you learned in these studies over the last 18 months about the proper role of board oversight in this whole arena?
Right. Well, the response by our clients to the situation that, as we talked about, and also as I went through the tough economy and the regulatory environment, is further developing their best practices within the organization, including the way their organization governs their executive compensation. So some examples on slide 17 would capture around best practices of governance of executive performance and compensation are listed on the on the left-hand side of the slide. For example, definition of committees is very important to establish, including with that written charter with a prescribed process that is strictly adhered to. Understanding board roles and CEO roles. There's a definitive line in what each of those are, and it's critical that organizations understand what those are. Establishing committee calendar and agenda is important. Compensation philosophy is extremely important. The 990 review, establishing your rebuttable presumption of reasonableness, and of course the spotlight of the CEO performance appraisal, which is what we want to talk about.
Kate, before we move off the slide, it seems like it would be prudent for boards and chief executives to recognize that one way to inoculate the organization against some of these challenging oversights and reviews, especially from the IRS, is to demonstrate that there is a well thought out, disciplined process to CEO performance planning and appraisal. Let's go further into an understanding of what some of those dimensions might be.
Sure. A key responsibility of the board involves management oversight and review, and this is accomplished through the routine performance appraisal. The Joint Commission on Accreditation of Healthcare Organizations mandates routine assessment of the chief executive's performance, believing that it is the primary indicator of good governance. Both the board and the CEO need a clear vision of where the organization should be, and this vision helps delineate objectives to guide the CEO's activities. And in the next section, slide 20, we talk about the value of the CEO and the board having a robust conversation on planning for the performance appraisal. And this vision that I alluded to just previously is one of the goals of that conversation. And Jim, I know you work closely with clients on getting this conversation started between CEO and board. I'll let you kind of tell us more about the talking points that you walk through with them and encourage them to have.
It is easy to talk about having a more robust conversation between the board and the CEO about the CEO's performance plans for the coming year and how well they've done in the past year. But what we've found time and time again, boards and CEOs do not look forward to the CEO performance appraisal process. Many look at it like they're going for a root canal to the dentist. And so the critical first lesson that we've learned is that there at least is a conversation looking at the need for a future performance plan that identifies and captures in writing the mutual expectations between the board and the CEO of what he or she is supposed to be trying to accomplish. That's, however, average boards and CEOs are starting to embrace looking forward to the coming fiscal year about some metrics of performance. I know you'll be giving us some suggestions about what dimensions and objectives might be factored in to the performance plan for the CEO. The one thing that we found, however, in this conversation between the CEO and the board, there's got to be a much more explicit discussion about the career plans. Many boards feel they get a talented exec, and all they have to do is keep them comfortable with pay and a good working environment. But that we're finding is not going to achieve the levels of performance the organization needs and are not going to be self-fulfilling and self-satisfying for the chief executive. So we found 4 important elements. One, this conversation should at least once a year have the board chair and perhaps the executive committee talk about the career plans of the CEO, not for the coming year, but for the next several years. Second, there should be some clear discussion about professional growth as well as personal growth as a part of those plans, and also that even conversations about sabbaticals, opportunities to grow and interact with CEOs in other industries, and certainly even one of our clients has been developing an opportunity to work with the Institute of the Future to really strengthen and enhance their strategic visioning. So, Kate, on this first point on slide 20, the conversation is key, and we hope that our clients and others that are participating in this webinar will think more broadly about how to approach that conversation. I know you want to run through some additional details, too, of this performance planning activity.
Sure, and at this point, I want to jump in and mention a thing or two about compensation as it relates to the performance appraisal. The annual performance appraisal, to a small degree, is tied to discussions about CEO compensation, but the appraisal for the exclusive purpose of adjusting the salary can turn the process into a very narrow exercise. It really defeats the overall purpose of the evaluation itself, which is to encourage the growth and development of the CEO, while at the same time aligns to the vision and goals of the organization. So it's critical to establish 2 or 3 key objectives for the performance evaluation. But again, we strongly recommend that the CEO's salary adjustment should not be an objective of the evaluation. And this is also partly because the performance is only one aspect of compensation. You can identify components of the evaluation that will be used in assessing compensation, but our firm encourages clients to rely on their compensation philosophy for setting salary. So if your compensation philosophy takes pain at the 60th percentile, that's what should drive your salary decision. You've created a philosophy for a reason, and you have a market driving the data to use. So these are the tools that we believe you should take advantage of. You've already put them in place, so use them. And the incentive plan is a tool for executing the pay-for-performance philosophy that exists at your organization. So essentially, we say to our clients, let your incentive plan do its job, and let the appraisal do its job.
Kate, I want to just emphasize for the participants on this webinar that last point. It's so critical, especially as it relates to the performance appraisal for the Chief Executive Officer. I hear you saying it really must be more of a tool for CEO performance planning and development, not just that link to pay. That makes so much sense, and the really strong organizations are finding creative ways to make sure that that happens. Let's continue forward in our journey looking at the performance planning and appraisal process.
Right, and that's a great point to highlight, Tim. But that doesn't mean that your appraisal form can't capture some of the saw your situation and you find your organization in at this point, or may find that your organization isn't at this point, your incentive plan is capturing the goals necessary to move your organization out of your current crisis or current situation. But the appraisal form can also do that. And that's established, or that's done by establishing key objectives for the performance appraisal, and then also the criteria factors. But going back to the key objectives, examples would be capturing qualitative goals needed to move a company beyond the current crisis. Again, as I said, that are not already captured in the incentive plan. And then as Jim was saying just previously, it's just the other objectives of the performance appraisal we always suggest as a standard is the CEO's professional growth and development. And then as far as the 8 to 10 criteria factors, he should relate to the defined objectives that were established, and then keep those criteria not only established tied to the objectives, but also then tied to the challenging environment and the CEO's development. So some examples that we find our clients using in this particular environment that they're living in is increasing focus on fundraising. They're short of funds. This is a critical criteria factor. Creating a particular culture that the board wants established in the organization. Community benefit, again, we come back to this. Quality of care, leadership and development, etc. These are all different examples. Continuing on slide 21 are more examples. But I want to go back to the community benefit again. Again, this is an area I brought up earlier that regulators are paying particular attention to. So if you can show that you have this needs throughout your organization, you're going to be better off when they approach you for their surveys, their audits, etc. This is something you need to demonstrate in your organization along with all of the best practices that we went through as examples on slide 17. Moving on to slide 20, there's a couple more points that we've outlined as being critical to the planning process. At the bottom of that slide, determining feedback groups. It may be that your board has decided board members is the only feedback group that they want in the process this year, or it may be that your board's decided a 360-degree process should be followed. We do encourage our clients to engage in a 360-degree process every few years, as those results provide insights into the organization that you may not be getting from just having a board member providing feedback. And yet, at the same time, those results that you're getting back from the additional feedback groups, such as your physician groups and your executive team and foundation members, are maybe not insights that have changed from year to year. And so, again, it's not necessarily a process that we encourage clients to follow every year, but at least every couple or every few years, we do believe it's good practice.
Kate, that's another good observation to highlight, because if the board and the CEO want to send a signal out and set an example that the value from 360-degree reviews inside the organization and with middle managers makes sense, they will need to practice what they preach occasionally, as you've indicated.
Exactly. The last point, determining the appraisal tool to be used. Another important piece in the planning process that should be determined before the actual fiscal year has begun. I would say probably half of our clients at this point are using a web-based tool. It may be a little higher. And some of our clients are using a combination of the two. It really depends on the comfortableness of the feedback group and what they want to use. On slide 22, we do provide a screenshot of our customized web-based tool. And again, this is customized based on not only the objectives that you've established for your organization for the year, but also then the criteria.
What are some of the benefits of using a web-based tool, Kate, when you talk with boards and CEOs? I mean, it of course looks nicer, but what's the substantive reason why so many more are using a web-based tool?
Yeah, the two biggest reasons probably would be the ease of compiling the data. It's technologically driven, so you're not having this manual compilation of data, but also then the time saving in using something like an online tool saves a significant amount of time to the person who's compiling the data and establishing the results.
Easier to use, faster results, that can help avoid some of that anxiety that some of the board and CEOs have as barriers to getting the process done well. Another example or approach that helps the process occur is taking an orderly approach to it, even a calendar of events. I see you pulled together such a calendar. Maybe you can help us understand what's involved in that element of planning for the appraisal process.
Right. On slides 23 and 24, we've provided a sample calendar of one that we've put together for a board around the planning process. And in general, we find that if the process is laid out in front of the board, it's more likely that they're going to take the time to follow the planning process properly. They understand what needs to be done, and they understand when it needs to be done. And you'll see in October and December is probably the most critical time period for the planning process. And this calendar is based on an organization that has a fiscal year of the 12-month calendar.
Kate, I know there's some very useful information here. It'll be a little bit difficult for our colleagues to see on the webinar screen. However, all of you will have an opportunity to receive these files. We'll send them to all that are registered. And as you know, you'll be able to download these and some supportive materials from our website after this webinar. Why don't we continue forward with some more insights into the process of conducting the appraisal by looking at slide 26.
Sure, and this we're trying to capture some of the basic pieces of the process used in the CEO appraisal. We're not going to go into all of them, maybe just highlight a couple of them and go into more detail on those. And the ones that we're wanting to spotlight aren't necessarily ones that we find most important in the process, but ones that we see organizations not doing or maybe not doing well. So again, these aren't ranked in order of importance, and then our discussion isn't necessarily around the most important. But one of them that we want to bring to your attention is in having the full board participate in the process of providing feedback. You'll have a committee obviously set up who's guiding the process, but you'll want the full board to participate in providing feedback to the organization or to the committee, as this establishes a great deal more credibility than just having the committee or one or two people complete the appraisal. And therefore, then your results are also going to be more robust with having additional people provide feedback. Also important is the issue of transparency. This too is critical in the environment that we're living in. You want your best practices to be transparent, and you want them understood. So people then with higher transparency understand that your process is well defined and well followed, and it occurs regularly. This also helps create a culture in your organization too that understands and values the review process. So that's a kind of a secondary benefit to creating a transparent process. Also important, number 5, of having an objective party collate and summarizing your survey responses. For a number of reasons, we urge our clients to engage in this type of practice as one, it saves time in your organization of having someone within your organization putting together the information, but also it just lends more credibility to the results if you have an objective unattached party collating them. They have no stake in the results. But probably the most important reason would be that when you have an expert collate the results, they're going to be able to pull them in a way that's most effective for your use, and they'll analyze them in a way that's going to be most beneficial to your board to take them and go forward with them in their planning for development and growth of the CEO. There's some extremely effective measures in putting together results that really are a great platform for your board to use again in deciding areas of growth and development.
Kate, on that issue of growth and development, which is an important subtext in this whole webinar, I know that you're advocating that the CEO conduct a self-appraisal, and his or her profile and response pattern would then be compared to the board, And obviously that, I would guess, gives an opportunity for, again, this whole concept of a critical conversation, a positive conversation between the board and the CEO about if there are differences of opinion on how well the CEO performed. And I've seen many CEOs are harder on themselves than the board usually. How have you seen or how do you think the importance would play out on this mapping the CEO's profile against the board? Because it seems to me that if there's a difference of opinion, the board can have a conversation about what caused that opinion and how could that be strengthened and what the board could do to help support the CEO going forward. Do you have any comments about mapping CEO profile response compared to the board and how that might contribute to enhanced conversations about performance development?
Sure, that's an important result that comes out of the report that's put together is setting up the CEO's own self-appraisal versus what the board's feedback was. And this then does establish a ground point, kind of a conversation between the two. And coming together and having a meeting around this report enables the board to review the CEO's strengths and limitations as identified by the board and by the CEO, and then to develop an action plan for the upcoming year.
I think that's the key. I'm delighted to hear that you found that action plan to actually use the results of the performance appraisal for enhanced development of the CEO is starting to happen more. It's so important, and I'm glad that you're highlighting that.
Sure. Going back to slide 26 and some of the pieces of the process, the only other one we're going to touch on is number 9 and 10. And as another outcome of this conversation that the board and the CEO have around the report, that's the analysis or the summary report, is the CEO then preparing suggested growth and development measures for the coming year. And this is really a key point. And once the CEO has done this, it's also critical for the community to review those proposed measures from the CEO.
We're nearing the end of our webinar. Kate and I want to try and share with you some observations about some of the key conclusions. You'll see on slide 28 we've identified 5 of them that I'm going to ask Kate to make some comments about. I would say, however, as I'm listening to Kate's conclusions from her study of the good and the bad and the ugly of CEO performance planning and appraisal, there do seem to be some messages that are captured by words that begin with the letter C. Clearly, the whole area of conversation is important between the CEO and the board. Conversation before the appraisal is done, a year in advance, looking at the objectives to be accomplished. Conversation about the process and who will provide input into the review this year. And very importantly, as Kate has mentioned a number of times, conversations about grounding the performance on value or community benefit and grounding the conversation about future action follow-up so that the CEO feels like he or she is really having an opportunity to grow professionally and personally from this process. Another word is collaboration between the CEO and the board in this performance planning exercise. And the whole concept of the board and the CEO championing organizational performance growth by championing CEO performance growth. Kate, why don't you look at the 5 points that appear on slide 28 and give us some closing observations about these key insights for CEO performance enhancement. And I will also make some comments, and then we'd like to throw it open for some questions and answers in just a moment with our colleagues that are engaged in this webinar.
Sure. The first one on slide 28 is outlined as we write performance planning is at least as important as performance appraisal. And it's the conversation that the CEO and the board have that this planning takes place. And it is probably one of the most critical steps. It's
again, we've said this over and over again, it's when the objectives are established, when the CEO and the board talk about the vision of the organization and then create the objectives around the vision of the organization. And again, that vision and those objectives tie into the current situation of the organization, moving the organization beyond its current standing, beyond its current crisis, and making it a more, increasing its vitality. And also part of that planning then is coming up with the criteria. But it's this conversation between the board and the CEO that we keep going back to and that we want to continue to stress, because the outcomes of it are critical in guiding the rest of the planning of the appraisal process.
Kate, if we look at the second point on this concluding slide, I know you've spent several years in the firm looking at executive pay and compensation. It's only been in the last couple of years you've moved into the arena of planning for performance and oversight and support of CEO performance. I wonder if you'll make some comments on what you've seen over the years on this delicate balancing on paying for performance and also developing the CEO. How do you, maybe you can provide another comment on the link with pay and incentives, but balancing that with the developmental process.
Sure. I think what we've seen coming about in the last year in particular is organizations recognizing that pay for performance doesn't come out of the appraisal process, because the appraisal process doesn't allow for the type of maneuvering around salary that you want it to. And really your incentive plan allows for that additional pay for performance piece that your organization has. There isn't really built into an appraisal system that type of manipulation with pay.
So appraisal process is focused on developing the capacity and capabilities of the CEO, different of course, but related to some of the incentive pay to acknowledge progress the CEO may be making in some of those enhancements. Let's run through the rest of the points here, and then we'll throw it open for some questions and answers with our colleagues on the webinar.
Sure. Something else we also strongly encourage our clients to adopt is a long-term approach to CEO development beyond just a 12-month review and beyond setting expectations for the next 12 months. Tie the CEO's growth and development over the next 3 to 5 years with the organization's growth and goals over the next 3 to 5 years. Also capturing the qualitative competencies that are required to move the organization beyond its current standing. I've already touched on that, but it's qualitative competencies that usually capture the pieces of the performance appraisal. The quantitative are captured in the incentive plan. And also fine-tune your appraisal process, because it's the right thing to do for your CEO and necessary for the vitality of your organization and achievement of its mission, and not just because of this economy that we're living in and this healthcare environment that we're trying to survive in.
Wise counsel, Kate. Thank you. Let's see what questions we have. We hope that people will be taking away from this brief webinar this concept of the appraisal process being a much more robust and valuable tool to grow the performance of the organization by helping grow the performance of the chief executive.
Okay, thank you, Jim and Kate. As said, we'll stop here and go ahead and take some questions. In a minute, I'm going to go ahead and unmute all our participants' lines, so please be aware that at that time then we will be able to hear everyone. So you'll want to keep noises, talking, typing, any of that stuff quiet on your line till the end of our Q&A session, if you please could. Again, to answer or ask a question that we will answer, you can go ahead and type it into our text box and see if you have already done that already. You simply want to go to the top menu bar, top of your screen, click on that Q&A button, type and submit your question that way, and then we'll read off the question and answer it for you. Alternatively, again, you can visit the top right of your screen and go to the feedback status button. Simply drop that down, and you want to change it to denote your status as that you have a question. So change it to the purple square. Like I said, I see that we have a few questions that have come in through the text messaging, so I will go ahead and begin with those. Looks like Donald is asking to please speak more to the subject of assessment by all board members versus those closest to the, and you know what, Donald, I didn't get the full. You know, I'm going to ask Donald to go ahead and resubmit his question. It looks like it may have gotten cut off. I'm going to go ahead and take another one in the meantime, and if you could please retype this question and submit it, that would be great. Otherwise, I can go ahead and unmute the lines, and maybe Donald can just ask it that way. One moment.
The leader has unmuted your line.
Donald, if you're still there, could you maybe ask your question verbally for us?
Sure.
Speaking as a board member and having done a number of assessment surveys, in some cases I feel close enough to the action that I can be accurate in my responses, and other times I feel because I'm not on the executive committee or closest to some of the performance criteria as I in my other boards, less able to comment. So I'm wondering about how, as a board member, I get how I should think about that, and also as a CEO, how should I think about that?
It's a good question. Thank you.
Variation in degree of engagement.
Good enough question, absolutely. Both Kate and I will have a comment. Kate, did you want to react to that first?
Well, just to go back to the 360 process, that in some way accomplishes some of the gaps that you feel in being able to complete the appraisal when you have those additional feedback groups providing some of the additional information based on where they stand within the organization. I think that will solve some of your problem. But also, as a board member, you do have to appraise the CEO in a different way using different tools such as your monthly or your quarterly measures that the CEO is bringing back to the board meetings and discussing with you. You are going to have a little bit more limited options in the way of which you assess the CEO. But again, your interaction with the CEO during the board meetings and outside and other activities is essentially where you're going to be drawing your conclusions on his or her performance.
I do see this often where board members may not be as intimately involved with the capital financing strategy, so they feel uncomfortable offering a quantitative response to how well the CEO did this past year on designing and bringing to successful completion a capital refinancing. Or there may be dimensions in the quality that an individual board member isn't privy to. So that is understandable, and we do have board members that are uncomfortable in some dimensions of the response. However, all board members will have legitimate and often well-formed opinions on the qualitative dimensions of the CEO's performance. How well are they providing leadership? How well are they creating a culture where people feel like they can step forward with new ideas? How well are they demonstrating that they're an effective communicator and change management champion? So I think it is true that each board member will have slightly different levels of comfort on different dimensions of the performance, but that's a part of the value of engaging everyone to get that multi-dimensional insight. It's also an encouragement, I think, for other board members that are on this webinar to realize you're not alone in some of those questions, but I hope it also encourages the board members and CEOs to engage board members more robustly before the review process in the definition of expectations and goals for the coming year, because that engagement will help encourage people to stay informed throughout the year on some of those key dimensions of performance as well. Very good question. Don't feel nervous about having that soft spot occasionally. Thank you for teeing it up. Are there some other questions in the short time we have left?
There are, Jim. This attendee asks, what are examples of how a board chairman should organize a CEO performance planning meeting?
I think some of the high-performing boards that I've worked with and our firm has worked with have the following characteristics. First of all, it should be a scheduled meeting that is not rushed. It oftentimes occurs outside of the hospital, although certainly we're all aware where the chairman may come in at a scheduled appointment with the CEO in the CEO's office. The key is that most of these conversations should be at least an hour in length. The more often that the board and the CEO do it, the more comfortable they get and the more the quality goes up as well. The conversation usually should begin with an understanding that the CEO is the most important employee of the board, and that the board wants to take as disciplined approach and as formal approach to investing in their CEO that they do in some of their clinical service line planning, their capital planning, their talent management in general, so that the board chair comes in prepared to have this intelligent conversation about expectations for the coming year, of course, but not just short-term or next year objectives, but asking the CEO, what are the future career plans for the chief executive? What do they expect, where would they like to be growing new skills? How can the board, with its different network of relationships, support the CEO to work with leaders from other industries to enrich not only their professional and personal growth, but perhaps relationships that can benefit the organization? So planning the conversation by that board chair is important. Keeping it long-term, not just for the next fiscal year, is another part of it. And one area that we've recently explored is a study that we'll be publishing on the whole concept of sabbaticals, where a chief executive may have been with an organization for 5 or 6 years and should earn the right for an opportunity for 5 to 8 days away from the hospital or the health system to have a learning experience, a sabbatical, like we see in the academic side. Even in these tough fiscal times, long weekends at least for intellectual and professional growth by interacting with others can be a part of the catalyst for that conversation to make it more interesting for both the board chair and for the CEO. So I think the short response is come prepared to talk about expectations, short-term and long-term, and the flow, I think, will get easier for both the CEO and the board chair. Thank you for the question.
Okay, Jim, thank you. With that great question and that great answer, I think we'll actually wrap up our Q&A session there. If you would like to ask additional questions or would like to have a discussion with any of our presenters, you'll see up on your screen that we do have the contact information listed for them. You can email them or call them directly. Also have listed our website address. On there you can pop on and view have other webinar presentations, white papers, articles. You can simply go to ihstrategies.com and visit our Knowledge Center, and all those resources are there. I also invite you to visit the events page of our website. There you'll find other webinar listings that are coming up, as well as that you may register for, as well as other industry events where some of our consultants will be speaking at. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you again to Jim and Kate for presenting in our webinar, and we hope you all have a great rest of the day.